Hello.
Mhm.
Morning. Yeah. Welcome to the new year.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right. Is there any new New Year's resolutions or anything for you? Or
Yeah, just make it to 2027.
yeah, that's good.
That would be good.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying I've been up early working on an abstract. So
Oh, okay. What is it for? Like,
it's an Alzheimer's conference.
okay, that's good. All right. So yeah, welcome to the new year. This is last year. I think we did a pretty good job of doing the Saturday morning NeuroSim uh, content and kind of figuring out things from that. We got to review a lot of papers. We got to talk about a lot of topics, and I think we have this nice set of things that we switch back and forth between. And if you haven't seen it yet, go to our YouTube channel and you'll see the annual report, which I gave. I posted, I think, at the end of last week, right around January 1st, talking about what we did last year, what will, maybe things that are going to lead into the new year, different research themes, different topical themes, different types of outreach. And then we also talked about some of the sort of the relationships between the different components. So we have sort of a core set of collaborators, and then we have these sources of sort of consumptive resources. So I showed this figure in the Slack. This was over the holiday, and I don't know if everyone saw it or not, but we'll look at it and I'll explain what it is. And then Jesse saw it and he was pretty excited about it, just from an administrative standpoint. So this is our sort of our collaborator graphic. So we have these interactive sort of collaborators. We have OpenWorm, of course, which we've been collaborating with for a long time. JoPro, which is Jesse's organization. Neurotech X, which is, of course, what Morgan's involved in. Neuromatch, Neuromatch Academy, where, of course, we've worked with since 2020. Active Inference Institute, which, of course, we've worked with, for several years, and I'm on one of the committees there. The University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then INCF, who sponsors our Google Summer of Code activities. So those are, are interactive. We do special things with them. We talk about them a lot, that sort of thing. They may or may not provide support, but we're kind of integrated in different ways. Then we have our collaborations. So our collaborations are, of course, the Tower, Embodied Intelligence Conference, BICA, which is the Biologically Inspired Cognitive Architectures group, which they have their conference every year. We usually present a paper there. And then Plot Twisters, which is something that Jesse works on with collaborators. Then we finally have our consumptive resources, and I like this because, when we do these meetings or we do anything in the group, we're usually drawing from different areas, drawing from different resources, and we like to make sure that we attribute them, but also know kind of where our food is coming from. And so that we have the International Society for Artificial Life, CompuCell 3D, the Santa Fe Institute, the Brain Inspired podcast, the Augmentation Lab at MIT, the Ecolopto group, and then this work. And I'm just kind of loosely defining a community of people doing organoid work, and neuronal cell culture and all of that. The things we talk about when we talk about like dish brain or some of the work on microelectrode arrays and other types of neurotech like that. So that's kind of the diagram. And then of course, these resources can change from year to year, or, depending on what we're working on. And so that's, and of course, we collaborate with groups, but we also consume what they're producing. So that's all kind of in that mix. So I think this is a useful sort of diagram for showing kind of where we're getting our influences from, who are working with kind of as a, contributing to what they're doing, and then where we have these more interactive relationships. And so if, if we think about an organization we want to sort of maybe draw from or collaborate with, or, have a joint program with, we can think about it in this way. And it's useful. Okay, so yeah, that's one thing that I talked about over the break. And of course the annual report, which I present in full, and that's on our YouTube channel. So the other thing is that this last Monday we started up again with DevoWorm. So we're going to be doing DevoWorm in 2026. We did the first meeting on Monday, and that meeting was kind of a welcome back, bringing people back into the new year. This is our DevoWorm YouTube channel. So we have, of course, I did an AI summary of our meetings for the second half of 2025. That AI summary is available on the channel. I also did the annual report for DevoWorm, which was at the annual meeting for DevoWorm. That was actually kind of at the beginning of the break. And we had a good annual meeting. We chatted a bit about, different things. We always have people attend the meetings. We have our scientific advisory board. We have our people doing work, our senior contributors, and then we have people who are visitors. And the visitors are people maybe interested in contributing or something like that. And so that was a good meeting. And I presented on behalf of DevoWorm. And we only get a little window of time during the main meeting, so I decided that, I wanted to give a longer report. And so that's what this report is. It's a 41-minute video going over what we did in DevoWorm last year. So we didn't really publish any papers in DevoWorm last year, but we did do different, Google Summer of Code projects. We also had different sort of longer term projects where we were building in those areas. So, that meeting that annual report will tell you more about that. So yeah, we last year in DevoWorm, we had 42 meetings. The AI summaries, I think, are useful for kind of summarizing all that activity. Because that's a lot of activity. It's like 25 hours of content or something like that. And then trying to figure out what the main themes are there is really challenging. So the AI summaries kind of talk about this one, every time you do it in Notebook LM, it gives you like a report, and it gives you kind of a title, and every time you generate a new one, it changes the title, but basically it's trying to summarize everything. And in this case, for the last half of 2025, it was the uncrackable worm. And I'm trying to remember what the one for 2025.1 was, if I can find it. It's this one. I don't have it in the title, but you can see that some of the, let's see if I can find some other, okay, so for 2022.2, which was the last half of 2022, it was decoding development. For the first half of 2023, it was Life's Great Construction Project. For the first half of 2022, it was The Brainless Architects. For the second half of 2023, it was How Life Builds Itself. So it hooks onto this theme of like where we're talking about the self-organization of life. We're talking about some of these things having to do with reverse engineering development, architectures, construction, and then, cracking the worm. And it's just picking up on, words that we've said in the meeting. So maybe we mentioned sort of the aims of OpenWorm, or some of the things, larger, sort of broader perspective things we're talking about in DevaWorm. And so it's using those things to help us understand those things better, those meetings better. I've also played around with the slide generation function in NotebookLM, but so far I haven't really found those greatly enlightening. So we'll just leave it at the videos. And I think, if you go through, you'll see it just does, kind of pick up on some themes, and then you can go back to the videos and get more detail there. So in 2026, number one was where I talked, actually we did do some short updates. Then I talked about this concept of neutral theory in evolutionary biology, and then some of what they call the function concepts. So in biology, of course, function is a very important concept, but it's also can be a pre-scientific concept sometimes. Or sometimes you can define function in ways which are or are not warranted. So, for example, if you think about a gene doing something in the biology of an organism, what is that thing that's doing? Is it contributing to a trait? Is it producing an enzyme? Is it doing nothing? A stretch of DNA might be sort of junk, or it might be like functional, or it might be multifunctional. It might contribute to a larger complex trait, or it might just have a very simple function. So all these things are kind of, we want to be very careful when we talk about function. And neutral theory is interesting because it suggests that a lot of evolutionary change is actually not the product of natural selection, but the product of molecular changes and sort of the functioning of the molecular milieu, which is where you have all these molecular constituents interacting and shifting their frequency due to, subsampling of populations and things like that. So it's an interesting kind of review of a paper and revisiting some things from the past. We also talked about multiphysics and materials. So, we're talking about tensegrities in the group. Susan Crawford Young is really interested in that. And so, we're kind of visiting this idea of super stability or tensegrity structures. And one of those things, of course, is to talk about materials and to talk about the multiphysics of materials. So in development, we want to be able to talk about multiphysics, not just biophysics, but biomultiphysics. So when you have a process, a developmental process, you have physics going on. Well, you don't have just one type of physics. So for example, you don't just have cell migration, or you don't just have adhesion. You have these sorts of mechanical things going on. You have these sorts of bioelectric things going on. You have these other types of physics operating at the same time. And you need to be able to model all these different types of physics. Now, there is software to model multiphysics. The problem that we're finding is it's not really specialized for biology, and it's not really specialized for dynamic structures. So we have, models that model buildings well, or software that models buildings well, and models mechanical systems well, but it doesn't model biological systems. It doesn't model open-ended systems. It doesn't model these sort of systems with causal closure. So all these things are challenges in doing this work. And so I talked a little bit about that as well. Okay, so one of the other things I did over the break was I was playing around with this program for Mac OS. It's called Draw Things. And Draw Things actually draws from the stable diffusion community, or the sort of the remnants of the stable diffusion community. So I think Morgan mentioned this, is that when stable diffusion was very hot a couple years ago, they had a bunch of forks, a bunch of communities, and then there was a group that branched off from stable diffusion and started developing their own software. Now, as I understand it, DrawThings is sort of a fork of that original project, and they've done other things here, and they've built this software where you can do generative AI image generation in an interface. It's local on your machine, so you can install it on your machine. You need quite a bit of RAM to do that. So if you're using Mac Silicon, and maybe you have 16 gigs of RAM, this works okay. It doesn't run every model well, but it runs enough of the models well to be able to do some interesting things. So I was playing around with it. I don't have any images right now. I'm kind of embarrassed about what I was generating because it wasn't very good. But you basically add a bunch of prompts, and then you can also add negative prompts so that you can give it sort of a way to latch on to different terms. You might give it negative prompts to get it away from certain things, and then you can generate different images. And so the advantage of this type of interface is it's relatively easy to kind of use locally, so you don't have to go to a cloud server to do this. You can do this all on your own machine. You have a number of models you can draw from, and then you have these different ways to tune the image. So you can use LoRa as a post-processing step. You can use there are other models you can control different aspects of the image. You can do use random seeds and set the image size and all that. And then of course you can generate these on your local machine, and you can start a project where you prompt a certain image like an astronaut on a horse, and then you can refine it through subsequent prompts. So it kind of improves upon what you're doing. I was trying to develop a sort of a visualization of DevoWorm and see what it did. And it was doing some things that were, I don't know, every time I asked generative AI image generation software to generate something, it's always like some science fiction worm that looks like it's something out of the Matrix. Yeah, it's not. It's not the best, but you can keep playing with it, and that's what I want to do with that. So, really accessible software here that's out, and this is something that I don't know what the use is exactly, but So, did we have any updates from Morgan or any other comments from Morgan?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I'd certainly love to throw Biopunk on your list there. I mean, just in terms of the organoid development.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean, I think the big are we got a number of things happening, exciting things this year. But first is just next week. So in San Francisco, the second largest conference that the city hosts is called JPM Healthcare. So we're doing some events that are for that. This is actually more kind of this is more kind of like Neurotech at Frontier Tower in the sense of doing things with companies. So this is like the Kernel headset, which is a near infrared, high density, like whole head near infrared system. So what that allows you to capture is a signal that is very similar to fMRI in the sense that what you're actually looking at is changes in oxygenation, deoxygenation of the hemoglobin. So it's an indirect measure. It has some you know, it has some confounds that are due to blood flow and other physiological changes like that. You know, it's not a direct electrical measure like high density EEG or something. Yeah, so that's going to be really interesting. I mean, it's nice to work with them. They're one of these companies that's got deep pockets because of a, you know, rich, let's call him eccentric funder. But you know, it's hard to find a neurotech startup that is not backed by a single individual. that has some sort of story with them. I guess that's just our day and age in this. Yeah, it's like not the age of innocence. is our income inequality time periods? Let's see. What do we call it? Let's just switch over.
Okay.
So that's interesting because, you know, like again, it is actually it's an interesting engineering in the sense that, like, you know, a lot of what we do develop doesn't have that kind of backing. So they've got like developed, you know, custom ASICs and things like that to really miniaturize a lot of the hardware. And you know, the other big push that we've made this, or you know, like right before the holidays, is to fully utilize like GPUs the way that all the kids are doing these days. and that seems to be part of what they're doing too. So they're using the Jetson Thor. So it's interesting because they're basically using a platform that I see the robotics floor using, right?
Yeah.
So it's you know, like you just can't get away from the utility of you know, GPU, which is, you know, like GPU is really just code for massively multi-parallel, right? And yeah, so it's nice again just being in the tower to see what the other floors and, you know, the other kind of frontier areas are using in terms of tech. So, you know, like again, like robotics and AI, obviously, you know, the kinds of methods that they're using, kind of simulations they're using, there's all sorts of overlap with work that is very much, you know, orthogonal. But the GPU as well, right? I mean, just in terms of like how it's become an essential part of, you know, like the full stack in the sense of like IoT to, you know, to data center, right, as some use. So, you know, the kinds of things people are doing with just the Jetson is kind of like, you know, do you need it for your Raspberry Pi? As well as like how they're trying to do, you know, what kind of accommodations they make for robotics, right? So it's like it's a somewhat hardened device. It's a device where you're thinking about power because you're not plugged into the grid. You're potentially carrying your battery with you, right? So that's one of the things that the robot has to, you know. So it's just like you can't have, you know, essentially any weight of battery because you propel that battery. You know, you've also got to lift it, right? So
So like interesting accommodations on that, and sorry, this is a bit rambling, but that's interesting too in the sense of like when you talk to the brain implant companies, and because I always get asked just in terms of how to break into one of these companies in terms of getting a job, and one of the things that one of the jokes is like, well, do you work on batteries?
Yeah.
Or do you work on power? Are you a double E that works on power efficiency, right? Because those are kind of their greatest challenges,
right?
So it's like we want to put a smart device into you, but then we have to power it, right? And so it's thinking about just the Apple Watch, right? So the Fitbit people, like I knew a lot of wearable people, and when the Apple Watch came out, it was just like they thought it was a joke because they were like, wait, you got to charge it every day? Like the wearables people were like, you wear it and forget it, right?
Yeah.
And it's just collecting data. Anyway, so so I've been working with DGX Spark, which is the so if the Jetson Thor is NVIDIA's kind of robotics platform, DGX Spark is basically a dev platform for data center compute, right? So actually, when BD and I met, I forget like the last, like I guess it was the New Year, and last Saturday, and we just kind of talked about some tech things, and this was one of them where it's just like it's an ARM CPU with the latest gen GPU, and how to then kind of like how your development stack needs to change for that. But it's been really interesting, like a lot of the projects. So I've been with the camera, which is the democratization in Africa of MRI, working with those guys, those students, having something that computes really fast is actually really helpful if your network is unstable. So that's been interesting, looking at some, been using neuroimaging projects, porting neuroimaging projects to this, and kind of testing out the speed up. So that's been interesting. We'll be doing another event. So that like NVIDIA is part of, or like we're demonstrating a lot of stuff with the kernel to do diffuse optical tomography. So to do kind of some of the stuff that Hussein's talking about. Like GPUs can be really, really helpful, and so and then Thursday we'll be doing another event, which is just highlighting a lot of the startups that are coming through the tower. The Neurotech X student clubs are all talking to each other about doing regional and international hackathons, which I think is awesome. I'm just really happy that they're talking to each other at all. And it's going to be really interesting to see what comes of this. So I'm looking forward to this year, them taking some more ambitious project goals, taking on some more ambitious project goals, which would be possible if they're talking and collaborating, and really hoping to help them with that. And yeah, and then Brain Hack Toronto is the week after, and yeah, so John Griffith is one of the incoming Neurotech X board members. He does whole brain electrophysiological modeling. He's a great comp neuroscientist, and has his own software projects that I've been looking at porting as well on the GPU. But really interesting work in terms of neurostimulation together with recording. So closed loop TMS EEG, which is really it's an interesting concept. So yeah, really looking forward to neuromodulation, neuroimaging coupled work this year. And, I'm not sure where the focused ultrasound is going this year, but we will be doing something.
Yeah.
and last night was a pre-GPM event, and so got the student clubs from UC Santa Cruz that will be organizing our regional Neurotech Hackathon. And I was saying to him, so he knows Kate of the Braingineers, and so he's like, hopefully you can get Kate and her co-founder Spencer to move to San Francisco. So if I can make that happen, certainly what I want to do, he thinks that there's a low cost midbrain organoid protocol that would be easy to get running, and that's our goal. I was saying with him that I think if we did some sort of neurobiotech hackathon or project that like the Mind in Vitro, that would be really valuable in terms of making the neurotech groups more like a robotics club. I mean, in the sense of like pulling off something that requires maybe a year of practice before you can contribute, but that would be that kind of multi-cohort organization I think would be really valuable to the neurotech student groups. I've also been trying AI coding, AI assistants. I'm learning from Russ Poldrack's better code, better science.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of the things that came up at the open room meeting is that you can use it's not really vibe coding, but you can use assistants to kind of refactor code basically. And so that's what they're doing with some of the open worm tools because they're, aging. And so you want to be able to update things, keep them running, which is good because, we always have that maintainer problem in open source where we can't always get enough labor or attention to things. Yeah, so then that's interesting, but I don't know. I think there's... of course, there's vibe coding, which I think we've talked about in the context of research software and how you can over rely on that. But that's not to say it doesn't have a lot of uses there.
Yeah. But, better code, better science is, recognizes what, doesn't lose sight of what the goals are with scientific software development. Right. And certainly where I'm starting, somebody was asking, so, are you automating your, they saw that I was looking at MRI data, and they're like, so, are you automating how it runs this GUI or something like that. And I was like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
I don't understand the question.
Right.
So what I was saying was like I've started with basically just the NeuroFedora work, where it's just like, so with RPM packaging, all you do is you write basically a small shell script that takes a software project, right, and makes an RPM, right? It makes a package and installs it in a kind of uniform way with these rules, and you have a very clear goal, right? Like I want it to compile. I want it to, I want to install it. I want to follow all these rules, and I've got a lint tool that checks the package, in a bunch of ways. I've got a bunch of guidelines. The compilers, the compiler tool set. Your build tools already actually are performing a bunch of tests and analyses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's already been really interesting because, as someone, and this is something Russ talks about too, is that like most scientists are amateur coders,
right,
in the sense that like we've had no professional training, right? Not like I mean, if I've had any, it was because I worked as a software engineering manager for a medical device company, right? But like even then, it was like I kind of read professional books myself because I felt like I should do that. Software, software training is a strange beast, which is not. Yeah. Anyway, but I gotta say, for someone who's dealing with a number of projects that are not mine, that are having compiler or other hardware issues that are super low level, like the AI systems is remarkably effective.
Yeah.
And because it's just like you just can't beat it's the breadth of its knowledge about low level detail, and as well as like how that somewhat intersects with the packaging and other software guidelines.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's like it's made me incredibly productive. I think I'm gonna make Fedora, like, so I've packaged all these tools that have previously kind of baffled me, and I just I kept it. I want to learn how to do it at the command line, with Claude Code, because it's just like I'm getting the response directly from the I try to build the project, and then that error output is like should be fed straight into the LLM, right? And that is those are the examples that I see that Claude Code examples that everybody is touting about right now. These are the things. So I'm looking at Claude Code versus Jules, which is Google's asynchronous agent. But it has been interesting. I mean, in the back of my mind, I am thinking about the software sustainability project, just in terms of multi-agent work, right?
Yeah.
And just how I see these companies developing what looks like the strategy in the software sustainability, in the sense that like they're all moving to multi-agent. They're moving to multi-agent where the agent necessarily they need the agents to write text files first that say what they want them. like they're talking about planning. They're talking about how to do multi-agent communication in a reliable way, you know? And so they're talking about sending text messages to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you mean like emails? Or,
Yeah.
and all they're coming up with is basically the kinds of multi-person communication that you have with the software team, where everybody's got these roles.
Right.
Right? They're just redeveloping that, right? So it is yeah, it's interesting to watch, but you know, and it's again, it's this problem, like software engineering is not a science.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, I think it's going to be a good year for the software sustainability project.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're looking, I guess, to write up some proposals for GSOC projects. So I mean, you know, we could do some, or keep that in mind for that.
Well, so here's the thing, and it's really funny. So I've been, you know, working with this coding agent to package, you know, for Fedora, and I asked it, you know, what do you think is the big project that's missing, and you know, what's the hole here, and looking across, like using NeuroFedora's, you know, database of not just projects but also projects that have been proposed.
Okay.
And they're like, well, the big missing thing is exactly what I said. It was the ITK. So they're like, ITK is the big project, and like ITK development has stalled on Fedora because it's such a big project. It needs somebody, you know.
Yeah.
And Ankit, who you know, runs NeuroFedora currently, you know, his focus is really computational neuroscience, right? And so, you know, he has packaged it previously. Anyway, I packaged ITK5. They're like, it's like multi years out of date now, right? So I still think there's a great case to be made for the what I said before, was just like you know, you unlock all these other tools if you can get ITK working, ITK VTK, and but it is very much like a looking at a couple of professors that are kind of they specialize in medical software development and medical machine learning, and like what, yeah, how they think about things, how they think about, you know, software development, and you know, reliability, and you know, that kind of like provenance in terms of software updates and things like that. Anyway, I yeah, I'd still love to push that. I feel like I would still need some you know, better mentors for anybody involved.
Yeah.
But I still I also want to ask, you know, Fedora team, you know, so I know at least one of the Fedora council that just got elected. So he's actually a former programmer from biochemical, you know, like he's like a systems biology markup language kind of guy, you know, like the ODEs for those kinds of models. Done a lot of, you know, chemometrics kind of stuff.
Right.
And so, anyway, he would get involved when we were doing NeuroFedora projects before, and he's now on the council. So, yeah. Anyway, when is stuff due? It's like you've already put proposals in.
Well, no, I think we have probably until February 1st or so. So
Okay.
we're kind of
Okay.
trying to get right now. We're trying to get sort of kind of thinking about what they're going to look like, and they won't post them though until later. So, but I definitely want to do something with open source sustainability in some fashion, like to ideally kind of move forward on, well, some of the things we've been doing. We've kind of gone in many different directions, and if we could kind of pull those back together a little bit, or so one of course is the multi-agent stuff. I think we've been doing a lot of multi-agent stuff over the past several years. We did large language model type multi-agent stuff with Sarah, and she actually did that kind of model where you have multiple agents. They're kind of sending each other messages or coordinating themselves around issues and tasks. And then, they're kind of developing a project, which is interesting, but it's, not kind of the same thing as what we're doing in the other part, which was reinforcement learning. And then, of course, we have an active inference component that's, that was something Brian was working on that kind of maybe ties together the other two. So I'm not, we can go in one direction or another, but we have all those strands. So
I mean, those threads are those threads are absolutely intersecting.
Right. But we can't do all of them, and one person can't do all of them, and you can't say just. I mean, because you could have someone pick from all of that, but it's like, what does the project look like? Because you're going to be soliciting people's sort of suggestions for what they want to do, and they have a certain amount of time. So it's like, how do we focus that a little bit better? Kind of say this is.
No, I hear you. I mean, I think the active inference is is what you want to get at.
Right.
I think, and so I think the question is, can you address that in the with a project that is still, that is already building on multi-agent reinforcement learning, and to again, I would say to that, yes, but it would be finding the right, making contributions to the right project, in the sense that or like you said, being very careful about the framing of it, like what aspect, you can still only kind of focus on one aspect of that in a 10-week period, so I know. I mean, I still really like is it Andrew Shaw, the computational psychiatry guy at Exeter. I think I've sent you a couple references, just in terms of I like that he does kind of toy examples. He's got really interesting coding projects that seem very digestible. They're not big frameworks. They're small examples to demonstrate particular points, I mean, of course, I'm biased to the computational psychiatry. I don't know how to necessarily make that into the software development, but
well, that is a bridge, but basically they're all dealing with collective behavior and the active inference aspects of that. So I know this computational psychiatry is focused on pathologies, but I don't know. Maybe you could study that in
Well,
large language models and that sort of thing.
yeah, I mean, it's modeling behavior, but the what he gets at, which is like kind of what again, like let's not forget that Friston is a psychiatrist,
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So if anything, I think of Friston as the he's sort of started computational psychiatry.
Right. Yeah.
And, like he is literally a computational psychiatrist, right? And so this kind of like having generative models for behavior is what these were the problems that he was working on, right? And I mean, again, like super glad that I traveled to London to just go and sit in his analysis meetings, like going back to like 2000, because it was really just super interesting to see him working, in the sense of like he comes into a room, there's a bunch of neuroscientists who've collected behavioral data.
Yeah.
and they're pitching him their particular problems and issues, and so it's like molded from 1,000 examples, right? Where but still, so I wouldn't say it's like it's modeling pathology. It's like I think it was also like trying to find these generative models that would then fit the behavior they saw, whether that was pathological or not, right? And ideally, like cognitive models would hopefully be able to tell you about something about like what the mechanisms are underneath these, right? Like like all the early work in terms of fitting distributions to reaction times to get a that mental chronometry is an insight to the mechanisms of mind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I yeah, because I was trying to get at like what is like what are the what's the essential software for a group like Yal Niv, who's a famous computational psychiatrist at Princeton, and is basically just probabilistic it's probabilistic programming.
Yeah.
So I went to her GitHub, and it's funny because it's like some stuff to connect. It's basically like tools for collecting data from Mechanical Turk.
Yeah.
tools to connect. So it's like JavaScript front ends for Mechanical Turk to do experiments. JavaScript connections to collect EEG data, right? So it's just like the same kind of thing, right? And then like the Stan project, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with Stan, but it's like a it's like PyMC. I don't know if you know, like these are like Bayesian tools. I think it was there was originally a project called Bugs, so I think it came out of Cambridge. So this was like the early tools for this, like Bugs, which is like Bayesian uncertainty with Gibbs sampling, something like that.
Oh,
like I'm trying to remember what the and then Then the successor is JAGS, which is just another give sampler. So I'm not sure what stands for, but like it can't be a coincidence that it's 4 letters. And it's got a very similar, this totally relates to kind of the Frisman stuff, because this is Bayesian. It's about modeling distributions, variational based, because it's like you're proposing distributions to use that are computationally tractable, but you're also trying to fit data with them, right? And yeah. I think the React. I mean, have you thought about using the React Infer, the Julia package from the Netherlands?
RX Infer.
Active Inference. Yeah. Yes. RX Infer. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I haven't dug into that really. I mean,
they had some. They had some new projects this like over the holidays. That was interesting. Anyway,
all right.
Sorry, I'm sure you've got more stuff to cover.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing about this though.
Yeah, there was something. Let me just check their LinkedIn feeds, because there was something that they were talking about. Yeah, Lazy Dynamics is the company.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so this is the first thing that I hit, which is not recent, 7 months ago, but it's getting at this issue about computational psychiatry, right? So RX Infer can be incredibly powerful for robotics, but you need deep probabilistic programming knowledge to use it. Right? So that's exactly this, which is funny, because it's like that's like you look at Yelniv's GitHub and that's the focus.
Right.
It's like like there's some stuff with Mechanical Turk in terms of just like how to get humans to actually interact. How to collect data at scale. Yeah. But the real key software there is the probabilistic programming. So why is this like not in? Okay. So maybe it was something that they presented at at NeurIPS. Sorry, I'm not. I will absolutely follow up.
Okay.
Oh well, so network of LLM agents. Okay. Yeah. We're about to hit some long flights. They're heading to the States. So you know what that means? Time to finish those demos. So let me see if I can find that, just in terms of what they were doing. I mean, like this is what they're looking at, right? Right. I mean, I would say that they think about they're, so why is it called a React framework, right? Because they want it to be the particular kind of functional programming is it paradigm? What do you call it? That they're using is about this kind of like online, they want online tools, right?
Yeah.
And which is also incredibly active, right? I mean, it's a very active stance. Is
Right.
just like everything about their project is very active. So I think there might be something that actually relates to this problem of multi-agents in an interesting way. But like, I mean, I think from that kind of collective problem, what you're looking for is something that, at its core is simple, but when you have lots of them interacting, it creates a really interesting structured complexity.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is more stuff. I mean, it's multi-agent, but they're working on math problems. Well, have we looked at the Sakana, the latest Sakana stuff?
No, actually, I don't think we've.
David Hough stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of there. I don't think we've talked about it that much.
Yeah, it's yeah. Oh, this is something that I think came out at NeuroSim. So I'm trying to find a next paper for the Coxsci reading group.
Right.
And if you've got any thoughts, please let me know.
Okay.
But I'm just seeing that, like, I think somebody had mentioned continuous thought machines, and I see that that's actually a Sakana.
Right.
like of course it is, yeah, I mean, did you have a chance to go over like A Life and Gecko this year? I mean, in terms of just like what we're kind of, the breakout projects.
I don't know about Breakout. I did a review of A Life, but
okay.
I don't know if it was in Diva Warmer here. But
okay.
I haven't like checked out Gecko. But
okay.
Like, yeah, I don't know what the Breakout projects are necessarily.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Obviously we just covered the big not what is life, what is intelligence
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
right? And the author was on the brainfuck paper that was like a super interesting A Life project where it was a super interesting A Life project that I think was presented at Gecko.
Yeah.
Because it was so evolutionary, right? Like it wasn't so much art. It was much more. It was much more life than artificial in the sense of like it was really kind of modeling DNA
Yeah.
in some much more compiler way
Right.
than say some of the other kind of than let's say Conway Game of Life kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's funny though because you don't really like Sakana's stuff doesn't I mean the AI scientist stuff is very old for Sakana. And I mean so like the Sakana stuff that's kind of like multi-agent LLM is actually 2024.
Okay.
And I still haven't seen, has anybody, Future House here, which is like a project funded by the Schmidt Foundation, and definitely trying to be, an AI science. They're trying to develop an AI scientist.
Right.
It seems like it's more like it's ending up to be more like a read and digest multiple papers in an interesting way.
Right.
Or like they actually have a paid service called Edison that I think is like 200 Edison Science. Edison Scientific. But like I don't know if anybody has, I don't think they can claim any successes. And yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I found a good RXing for. What else did you want to cover today?
Well, I had a couple of little features to talk about, so we can get on with that, I guess. I just wanted to mention that Jesse and I had a sort of an administrative meeting over the holidays, and we talked about a lot of the things that we want to do for 2026. Jesse, of course, wants to do this like meeting or talk series, and kind of following up on that. He talked about it before the new year. He also kind of talked about some of the new directions or extended directions that we want to take from his perspective. So that was interesting. I don't have it summarized in front of me, but there were some interesting nuggets in there, and when he attends next, we can go over that more. But yeah, I think we have a good sense of where we want to go. Yeah. So yeah, that's very interesting stuff. Yeah, please next week maybe bring something. I don't know. We could maybe cover some of the Sakana work or some of the multi-agent work. We can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to try and focus on the RX Infer and or like the Andrew Shaw.
Okay. Yeah.
Because he's also done some Julia stuff. I mean, it'll be Julia.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about here. So I don't know if we've talked about this book before. This was, of course, at one time we were doing the cybernetics meetings almost every week. And we're making ties to cognition and cognition futures and cognitive science. And we talked about Heinz von Forester, of course, who is a cyberneticist who had a lab at the University of Illinois called the Biological Systems Lab or something like that. And, of course, that was closed in the 70s sometime. And the building it was in is now like little quad, in front of the engineering library. But the inspiration for that lives on in some of the work that he did. So this is a book that he wrote well after that lab closed. It's called Understanding Understanding. And as rhetorical as that seems, it's actually about sort of this higher level cybernetics, where we get out to second order and third order cybernetics, we get to observers and all this stuff. So there's some interesting stuff in this book. I want to focus on one chapter here. And that is this chapter 11. It's Objects, Tokens for Eigen Behaviors. So this book was published like at around, I think, 2003. And it's from his work, in the past. So like it was pretty close to his death. But the point is that this is well before sort of the modern era of large language models and other things like that. So this is the article, chapter 11, Objects, Tokens for Eigenbehaviors. And there's a star here. I don't know what it refers to. Okay, this contribution was originally prepared for and presented at the University of Geneva in 1976 on occasion of Jean Piaget's 80th birthday. The French version of this paper appeared in a different volume. So Jean Piaget's 80th birthday, of course, Piaget is a developmental person, and he, of course, developed Piagetian methods for looking at development. So it's interesting that he's kind of connected to that. And so this is a seed, alas, not yet a flower, for Jean Piaget to his 80th birthday from Heinz von Forester with admiration and affection. Sorry, I don't know if they were roasting Jean Piaget, but basically that's, it was roasting with papers. So I shall talk about notions that emerge when the organization of sensory-motor interactions, and also that of central processes, which are these anatomical structures, anatomical loops. So, there's this whole idea of sensory-motor interactions being the sensory-motor loop, which is this closed-loop feedback system that includes different structures in the human brain, such as the cortical cerebellar spinal system and the cortical thalamic spinal system, is seen as being essentially of circular or more precisely recursive nature. So of course, we have these closed-loop feedback systems where you have sensory inputs, you act upon those sensory inputs, you get feedback from the body, from the sensory systems, and then you act again. And you have this sort of circular nature, circular causality that emerges from that. You also have this recursive aspect, because like some sort of for loop or some sort of other programming structure, you have things that sort of, processes get kicked off within these loops and persist, and they're regulated by the loops, so they're regulated by past actions, and basically you can reproduce actions, and you have this recursive aspect to it. So he focuses on recursion. Recursion enters these considerations whenever the changes in a creature's sensations are accounted for by its movements. And so he proposes SI equals SMK, which is this idea that the sensations are linked to movements, and movements by sensations, MK, MSJ. So you have two functions, SMK and MSJ, and those lead to SI and MK. So you have movements and you have sensations, and they're interacting, they're coupled terms basically. So you can see that here. When these two accounts are taken together, they then form recursive expressions, that is, expressions that determine the states, movements, sensations of the system. So movements and sensations are different states. So if I have a sensation of touching some object, I have this, maybe the previous experience of looking at the object, this intention to go touch the object, so I go grab it and touch it, and I verify that the object exists, and that gives me more sensory information, and so those things are related in this closed-loop feedback system. And then expressions that determine the states of the system, the creature, which is just kind of where the system is embodied in terms of these various states. One point that with more time, effort, and space can be made rigorously and not only suggestively, as it has been made here, that is what is referred to as objects. And then he has this term, Gegenstände, some German term, Gegenständers, and an observer excluded, and he has in parentheses linear open epistemology. So this is where we have this no observer involved. Appears in an observer included, circular and closed epistemology as tokens for stable behavior. So this is where we have this loop which doesn't have an observer, and then we add an observer. So when we have this no observer, it's a linear open system. When we have an observer, it's a circular and closed. And then this is like a token for stable behavior. Or if the terminology of recursive function theory is used, tokens for eigenfunctions. So he makes this connection between sort of stable behaviors and eigenfunctions. And then he's using this term tokens, which of course we use in machine learning all the time in large language models. And that's kind of an interesting aspect of this loop, is that you have these tokens that are doing things that are kind of independent units in this sort of complex system. Of the many possible entries into this topic, the most appropriate one for this occasion appears to me the recursive expression that forms the last line on page 63 of Piaget's Équilibration des structures cognitives, which is the the equilibrium structures of cognition. And then this is the term here, observer O leads to observer S, leads to coordination S, coordination O, observer O, etc. So this is a loop starting at observer O, going to observer S, and then coordination of S, coordination of O, observer O, and then you continue through that loop, and so it just loops around. So it's basically observations lead to coordination in these different aspects of or different components of cognition. So I told you this is a roast of Piaget, basically, for his birthday. This is an observer's account of an interaction between a subject, S, and an object or set of objects, O. So if you recall that second order cybernetics is this attempt to add the observer into the loop. So you have the loop, the closed loop system, and then you have the observer that's kind of outside, but it's not really outside. It plays an integral role in integrating this loop so that it's not sort of self-referential and doesn't have any sort of intelligent correction or whatever you might call it. So like in the context of a sensory motor loop, you might have this closed loop between sensation and movement, and then you have this sort of online correction mechanism that supervises that loop to make sure that it doesn't sort of run into sort of a self-referential set of collisions. So, you want to make sure that things don't collide or become, what do you call it? That they don't self-contradict. So this is, so we have these objects, we have these subjects. So in this term up here, we have an observer object, we have an observer subject. We coordinate the subject, which coordinates the object, which then leads to an observation of the object, and so on and so forth. The symbols used in this expression, defined on page 59, stand for, and then they refer to figure 1, which is this crude drawing of observer S, observer O, coordinate S, coordinate O, and this is all in French. Basically, this is an agent with an eye and a hand. That's about it. But it's an embodied agent, which is the subject. coordination, which is coordinate S, coordinate O. That's the objective of the agent. There's this observation of S, which is this hand, observation of O, which is the object. This is the observer here, which then coordinates this whole process. And I don't know what this looks like in terms of a brain circuit, but you might imagine that there's like, the actual feedback loop, and then there are other centers that kind of modulate that. And that's what we're dealing with the observer. Now, in the paper that we just put out on the ever good regulator theorem, we talk about observers. And we talk about their role in these closed loop systems. We talk about a system in the world and a model of that system and how that model can approximate that system. And when you're talking about something like world models, you're talking about a model that tries to approximate a system, but it has to do so in a way that is generalizable, and but it has to acquire that information from the system. So it can't just simply start modeling the system right away. It has to build up to that. You have to construct a model, and the way you construct a model, of course, is you train it with data. But you can't get all the way there just by training the model, because obviously if we had all the data that we could get for a specific system, then we could basically, we don't even really need to we don't need to talk about world models. We don't even need to talk about regulation. We just know that you have this model that approximates the world, and if you just train it with enough data, you're done. And we don't have the problem that we need to that we have in modern machine learning, which is we can't necessarily approximate out of distribution events. We can't approximate rare events, things like that. And so we need to have this system that generalizes things. And that's where the observer comes in. The observer sort of supervises that process. It adds in context, and it does other things. Now I have to say that in our paper, we haven't really dealt with this issue of being specific as to what those components are, only that that's the framework that we need to use. And so, you might think of the observer, or actually you might think of the object as something in the world, like a system in the world. You might have the subject, which is acting upon that information. So the subject is the model, the object is the system in the world. The object is generating data for the subject to pick up and incorporate into its own internal model. But that internal model is only going to be based on the things it can observe. If this ball, for example, behaves in a weird way that's not expecting, then it can't immediately respond to it. It has to kind of learn those behaviors, but then it still has to kind of find out where it fits in the scheme of things. And that's where your observer is important for online correction or things like that. So there's this relationship where the observer might be a symbolic model. It might be some other type of model, meta model, that kind of reinforces these trends on the internal model of the subject. In any case, so this is just kind of talking about the different types of things. The observables related to the action of the subject, the observables related to the object, the coordination of actions or of operations, the coordination of objects, and then this etc., which is an important sort of point here. And they don't have it in the figure, but it's the syntactic injunction to iterate with no limit specified, the sequence of these operations, HVF. So there's a lot of undefined jargon in this article, so I'm not going to get into that. But basically, you have this sort of syntax element. You have this sequence of operations element, and you have this iteration function, which we don't know what those are, but basically it's kind of thinking ahead in terms of this figure and what this will look like over time. So then, for the sake of brevity, I propose to compress the symbolism of before even further, compounding all that is observed into a single variable. So observation of object, observation of subject is compressed into a single variable observation, and compounding coordinating operations that are performed by the subject. Coordination of subject, coordination of object into a single operator, chord. Chord, which is the single operator now, transforms, rearranges, modifies the forms, arrangements, behaviors observed at one occasion. So this is where we have this coordination of one time point. And so this is where you can do a lot of things with this. You can transform it, you can rearrange it, you can modify it. It's almost kind of like maybe like a recombination operator in a genetic algorithm or something like that. If you're thinking of building a sort of a genetic algorithm like representation of cognitive processing, this is where you're sort of transforming the sensory data into different shapes or forms. You might reverse it, you might randomize it, and then teach your model about that, those sorts of transforms, those sorts of deformations of data. And then you have more information about the world than you otherwise would, because you say, well, you're observing in this order, but really it can occur in many different orders. It can occur randomly, or you have to distinguish it from being random, or you have to distinguish it from being backwards, or maybe it occurs in a backwards order. And so you present that to the model. The model knows what that is, and it eventually kind of understands that there's either this difference or this sort of extension. So that's an important kind of part of this model as well. So chord transforms things at one occasion into those observed at the next occasion. Express the outcome of this operation through the equality, which is this equality here, observation at time 1, coordinates observation at time 0. Okay, so that's basically it. This footnote here, 1, by replacing the arrow, whose operational meaning is essentially to indicate a one-way or semantic connectedness. Like things like in linguistic terms, it's things like goes to, implies, invokes, leads to. These are expressions that sort of point towards connectedness. And we, of course, will take things in the world, describe objects or relations to objects in terms of semantic content. So that's what we're getting at here. We're looking at different connectedness between adjacent expressions, with the equality sign providing the basis for a calculus. However, in the order that legitimate use of this sign can be made, the variables observe 1 must belong to the same domain. The choice of domain is, of course, left to the observer, who may wish to express his observations in the form of, for instance, numerical values, vectors representing arrangements, or geometrical configurations, or as observations of behaviors in the form of mathematical functions. So these could be things like the equations of motion, or biological propositions, which are things, one construct is from McCulloch Pitts. In 1943, they proposed this idea of the temporal propositional expression, or TPE. And we're going to go back to McCulloch Pitts later, but for right now, that's just something that he's putting in this footnote. Well, some relational fine structure is clearly lost in this compression. Gained, however, may be an easiness by which the progression of events suggested on the last line of page 62 and copied here cannot be watched. So this is just basically the sequence that Piaget proposed, and then it's just kind of things that are flipped around or pathways through this set of things that happen. So this is the information processing. You have this observation function, which moves the coordination function. The sort of the S function moves observation of S function, moves the coordination of X function. observation of O function can interact with the observation or the coordination of S function, and coordination of O leads to the observation of O. And all these things kind of move to the next time point. So you have the observation and coordination of S at time 0, influencing the observation of S at time 1. The observation of O at time 1 influences the observation of S at time 1. And so you have these relations. You not only have this closed loop system, but you have this temporal evolution, which is kind of mediated by this observer. And so this kind of goes through this. Allow the operator chord to operate on the previous outcome to give sort of this recursive correction or this recursive recombination. And then this just operates over recursion, where we get this complex system where over enough time we go from observation O, we get this coordination function, and we have observation N. And we can scale this up, so let N grow without limit, so that we have this limit to infinity of coordination of different observations, leading to observations over infinity. So, but what they're basically doing here is they're taking the small kernel of observation and coordination and scaling it up to a bunch of observations and coordinations of different things over time, over unlimited time. So it's almost like just thinking about like how we train AI models today. If we just trained a model, kept training it and training it and training it, we could get this to this observation limit of infinity. But we also need to have the observer in the loop to reach this observation of infinity that actually means something. So, I mean, that's what I'm getting out of this. They're basically proposing a lot of these things kind of way before their time, or at least their technical implementation time. But the point here is that the independent variable obs S, the primary argument has disappeared, which may be taken as a signal that the simple connection between independent and dependent variables is lost in indefinite recursions, and that such expressions take on different meaning. So one point that we brought up in the presentation to the Active Inference Institute, I think in 2024, was that if you have a cybernetic system, because you have this recursion, and if you build a big enough system, you have recursion that becomes very complex, especially when you have a lot of interactions between these loops, is that you lose linear causality, and that it gets swallowed up by this recursive aspect of the system, and that you actually can lose the connection between independent and dependent variables. You can also have really unique forms of recursion, unique forms of causality. So this is really kind of speaking to that, and it's really kind of, a way, if you built like a very large cybernetic system, not just this first order closed loop feedback, but maybe like a multiple order open loop feedback with observers in the loop, that you can have these kinds of variable types of causality, and you can have, interesting things emerge from those kind of systems. So this just goes on to continue on and talking about how you build these system ups from a simple closed loop feedback system to infinity, and this just kind of builds upon that. So note that while in this form of the expression has disappeared, all the expression in chord are finite, a new feature has emerged, namely that the dependent variable, observation infinity, is, so to say, self-depending or self-defining or self-reflecting through the operator chord. So this variable observation infinity, which is the sum total of the entire system, is dependent on this chord operator, which of course is operating within the loops, and it's being self-defined by the chord operator, but the chord operator itself is dependent on sort of what's going on in these local observations. And so that's kind of interesting. And if you think about it, it's just merely a time series of a closed-loop feedback system. Chord is operating sort of at each time point, the chord operator, but then the outcome over a long period of time is dependent on things that aren't defined until the initial interaction occurs. So it's just kind of this weird kind of causality that is hard to disentangle and hard to say do things like audit the operation of it. And you think about like evolutionary algorithms, and you go back to that, and you say, well, in evolutionary algorithms, we have a mutation operator which changes the initial string, and it can change the initial string in a way that so that when you at the end, your string looks very different than what it started with. And to that I say, we know that like from a lot of experiments in complexity that a lot of these types of operators and feedbacks can fundamentally transform a system and affect causality. So, looking at a system at the endpoint, it's hard to know what caused something. And, this is kind of all, I'm not going to get into the details here, but we've explored down this path in the literature, especially since this paper was written. So it's a very interesting set of observations from the perspective of this paper because it kind of predicts a lot of those results. Should there exist values, observation infinity I, that satisfy equation 7? So these are these equations up here. Call these values eigenvalues. So now we have this eigenvalue, eigenfunction, eigenoperator, eigenalgorithms, eigenbehaviors. And so it's like, eigenvalues are things you get out of dimensionality reduction analysis. You get eigenvalues for a matrix. And there are ways to summarize complex systems. And so this is where he's going with this, where you have these values that summarize something, some complex vector space or matrix or system. So what he's trying to do, I guess, is extract these eigenbehaviors or eigenvalues from these cybernetic loops, especially when you have a lot of them working in parallel or a lot of them working over time. So this is basically where he's going with this. And I don't want to get too much into this, but there is this nice diagram of the Ouroboros, and they have some unintelligible notation next to it. But basically this is a delta symbol, which is, so you basically have this delta symbol, which is that change is dependent on this closed loop system that is recursive, and then it's hard to disentangle, as we see with the dragon eating its tail, or the snake eating its tail. I don't know what this is. I guess it's a dragon, has feet. But this is the point here. I think it summarizes part of what he's saying, and then there's this other aspect of this coordination operator operating outside of or basically the closed feedback system, where this coordination operator is coordinating the recursion aspect of it. And then you have this observer or this observation, which is a closed loop. So the observation influences the next observation, and this coordination operator is sort of playing the role of the observer in making sure that those things are internally consistent. In other words, the coordination of compositions, i.e. the whole, corresponds to the composition of coordinations. This is the condition for what may be called the principle of cognitive continuity. So this is where if we have a piece of chalk and we break it apart, breaking pieces of chalk produces pieces of chalk. So this is where we don't transform anything by breaking it into pieces. It's sort of a linear view of cognition, where cognition is continuous. You can have like multiple observations, and it doesn't fundamentally change the model. You add on to the model, basically, or you decompose the model. You don't fundamentally change the model based on continuous feedback. This may be contrasted with the principle of cognitive diversity, which arises when observer I and the composition star are not the eigenvalues and compositions contemplated or complementing the coordination chord prime, which is chord prime, which is observer 1 and observer 2, or observation 1 and observation 2. And then that's not equal to coordination prime observation 1, coordination prime observation 2. So you're multiplying these two together. The combination of them is not equivalent to the multiplicative outcome of these, or the product of these, in which says that the whole is neither more nor is it less than the sum of its parts. It is different. So this, of course, then again predicts this paper. I think it's more is different. It's sort of a seed paper for the Santa Fe Institute by Anderson. And this is a paper that talks about emergence and how you have, a bunch of different things interacting. And the linear way to describe that would be to add those up and have the sum of the parts described. But emergence is different in that you have a bunch of parts that interact, and then the product of that is more than the sum of the parts. It could be multiplicative. It could be something else that emerges at the next level of organization. And so this is different, where the sum of the parts is not just the sum of the parts. There's this transformation that occurs. And this is different than this idea of cognitive continuity, where if you just have a bunch of observations over time, that you end up sort of with this, we might call it a Bayesian model, because you have this prior distribution of events and you keep updating that prior, and it keeps sort of normalizing your model. In other words, it sort of gets incorporated as a normal mode. And so you end up with something that is sort of approximated down to the proper behavior. So you start with like observations of different things, you're trying to put them together, and over time you get enough observations so that you can see the missing components and you get the picture of the whole. Cognitive diversity, on the other hand, is sort of this idea that you make a set of observations, and as you keep making observations, you don't fill in the entire picture, but you get this emergent property that gives you something different. So in other words, you see these parts, and then eventually you see this whole. It's kind of like the difference if I had a jigsaw puzzle where I started putting in pieces. One aspect of it might be that I want to, I have an idea of what the pattern is, and I'm putting pieces in place from different parts of the puzzle, and I don't know if I have the pattern yet, but my idea is normative. In other words, I'm looking at the different parts and I'm seeing how they're connected and they're drawn together by the sort of mean behavior, and then eventually, as I get enough pieces in place and I can see that mean behavior, and I can just smooth over everything else and infer what that is. With cognitive diversity, you have these pieces in different places and you're putting them together and you have an idea of what this is, but then when you finally get to the end of the puzzle and get everything in place, you see a totally different pattern. And that's almost maybe more like a semantic aspect of it, because you actually see the meaning in what the pattern is. In any case, I'll leave that here because this is an interesting connection. Remember, this predates more is different. So again, this predates all of the stuff that we know now. Eigenvalues have been found ontologically to be discrete, stable, separable, and composable, while ontogenetically to arise as equilibria that determine themselves through circular processes. Ontologically, eigenvalues in objects, and likewise ontogenetically, stable behavior and manifestation of a subject's grasp of an object cannot be distinguished. In both cases, objects appear to reside exclusively in the subject's own experience of his sensory motor coordinations. That is, objects appear to be exclusively subjective, under which conditions then do objects assume objectivity. This, talks, it not only talks about some of the things we talk about in second order cybernetics with the observer and how objective the observer is, but also it talks about ontogenetically because Piaget referred to that and referred to ontogeny as this development of this stuff. So you have to remember that from Piaget's perspective, all these systems are developing, or there's a developmental aspect to it. So it's like, emergence is development. The construction of these closed feedback systems are development. We're interested in sensory motor integration as development. So, sensory motor integration just doesn't happen at some point, and then, these faculties don't just come online suddenly. They develop. So maybe we have precursor components to these feedback loops, these closed-loop feedback systems, these sensory motor capabilities. So all that, it doesn't talk about that here, but basically that's the context of what we're talking about. And again, this is another picture of the Ouroboros, where the snake eats the tail of the other as if it were its own, and where cognition computes its own cognitions through those of the other. Here is the origin of ethics. So that's the last line of the paper. And again, we have this, I guess it's two lizards. I don't know if they're snakes, but they have feet. But they're eating each other's tails. And that's the idea behind closed feedback, is that they're eating each other's tails, and it's hard to distinguish between individual components. So a lot of good stuff on like emergence and cognition and computing cognition well before this stuff was given a formal set of terms. Okay, so I wanted to, we have some things to say though first.
Well, just, it's I think it's perfect as well that was in celebration of Piaget.
Yeah.
Just in one, how Piagetian terminology has also been so durable, or so long lasting, in a good way, right? Like because it was insightful, right?
Right.
And the Piagetian good in a way that Freudian bad. And that, and then adding that cybernetic, having someone seeing, or adding that kind of mathematical rigor. Well, certainly the
conceptual
formalism.
Rigor, yes.
The compositionality, the recursiveness, all of that. It was nice.
Okay.
And certainly, interesting. I mean, I don't think synchronicity is the right word, but certainly how interesting it is that he happened on terminology that is now super modern. A coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great little piece in the book. And there's a lot of other interesting stuff in that book.
Yeah.
I did want to.
And I don't get enough. I mean, I started in, not only classical liberal arts, but it, with William Blake and writers like him, I have. It's been a long time since I caught any alchemical diagrams. And,
okay.
Or symbolism, yes. So it was. I wasn't quite sure where he was calling those figures from, but but those were great additions as well.
Yeah. So there is this one other thing I want to talk about with respect to this. So this is Warren McCulloch, so it's not Pitts on this paper. And this is in the Bulletin of Mathematical Biophysics in 1945.
Yeah, you'll have to make that bigger.
Okay, yeah. So this is a heterarchy of values determined by the topology of nervous nets. And Warren McCulloch, he is actually, this University of Illinois College of Medicine is now University of Illinois Chicago. So he was up there. He's also a psychiatrist, or in the Department of Psychiatry. So, this is kind of talking about a little bit more. Now, I don't know if he talks about the term in the 43 paper, but he also talks, very much in the spirit of cybernetics. So because of the dromic character of purposive activities, the closed circuit sustaining them and their interaction can be treated topologically. I don't know what dromic means. Do you know, Morgan?
Sorry, what was that?
What's the word dromic mean?
I mean, no, I'm not. It's not coming to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
All right. Well, anyways, because of the dromic character of purposive activities, the closed circuit sustaining them and their interaction can be treated topologically. So he's going to take this topological view of what we talked about in the last paper about feedback and these circular systems and these closed circular systems, which are things that are kind of recursive in nature. It is found that the value anomaly, where A is preferred to B, B to C, but C to A, there corresponds a diadrome or circularity in the net, which is not the path of any drome and which cannot be mapped without a diagonal on its surface sufficient to map the dromes. So wow. Dromic is actually a very important term here.
Okay. So it actually is Greek, of course.
Yes.
Dromos, meaning race or running. But I think it is speaking to the race course.
Yeah.
Being circular.
Yeah, I think that would be.
And then so once I push through on that, then go back, because then it's like, doesn't he say bidromic?
Yeah.
So, no, sorry, diadrome. Or circularity in the net.
Yeah.
Which is not the path of any drum.
So I guess what he's saying is that, like, if you have a path from A to B to C, like a transitive path,
right.
You have like A to B, which is a path, which is a course, and then B to C is a course, and then C to A is a course, and then that's like you have competing courses, and there's a circularity that results because you have this bidirectionality from A to A. You can go outward from A and come inward to A. I guess is what he's saying. But then, of course, this topology is going to be like, if you do an experiment in the real world, you might have like, a choice, forced choice, or a choice experiment where you have some subjects say, do you choose A or B, and then break down your experimental system like that, and then that results in a path of activities, and then that's kind of what he's talking about. So he's mapping like values in terms of things in the experimental world to some sort of uh, pathway of activities. I mean, that's what I'm getting out of this, because I'm trying to think of this in terms of.
Yeah. Well, and diadrome would be a complete course.
Yeah.
Or oscillation of something.
Right.
So it actually can be used associated with a pendulum.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Interestingly, yeah. So I'm getting those great dynamical systems images in my head.
Yeah.
Of closed circuits, or closed paths.
Mm-hmm.
But being dynamic,
Right. And again, this is all before dynamical systems was worked out, so they don't have the language that we might have today. But
yeah. I mean, or someone who's just so intimately familiar with the fundamental maths that they're already seeing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thus the apparent inconsistency of a preference is shown to indicate consistency of an order too high to permit construction of a scale of values, but submitting to finite topological analysis based on the finite number of nervous cells and their possible connections. So this is what he's doing, what I can gather. He's taking these ideas about, like, if you had a behavioral experiment, or if you had some set of purpose of activities, you say, I prefer A to B, or B to C. You have this sort of transitivity where you have a bunch of things and you're making decisions between them. And of course, they're related through this sort of circularity. So you basically plot everything out topologically. You figure out what the path of preference is, and then you find that there's this loop. And then, of course, you want to map this not necessarily from behavior to some abstract graph or some abstract, representation, but you want to map it to a brain circuit or some nervous system circuit. And so that's what he's thinking about here, where we want to, have this topological analysis of a brain circuit tied to different behaviors, because he's interested in brains and ultimately in this what thing will become connectionism. So
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to parse this language. Sorry, can you leave the text up?
Yeah.
Because it's okay. So he's using drone to be the disease.
Drome is the sort of the pathway through. So like you have a pathway through this graph that he's drawing from these different behaviors or these different preferences. Drome is like the path, so it's like moving from one thing to another.
Okay. Sorry.
The diagram then would be circularity, and then he's mapping all this to something of like a nervous system map.
What's the title of this?
The title is a heterarchy of values determined by the topology of nervousness. So heterarchy is another term that, of course, is different from hierarchy. So heterarchy is something that the cyberneticists used extensively, but what isn't as popular as some of the other terms. And it's basically where you have a system of things that, if you think of a hierarchy, you might have, like, say, A, B, and C. There's a clear sort of order of these things. So like A maybe contains B, and then B contains C. So it's a linear hierarchy. And that you might think of that as like like where A is a category of all things, B is a category of like balls, and then C is like a baseball. It's a clear hierarchy. A heterarchy is different, and it's where you have either these non-transitive hierarchies, or you have a system where you have different components that do different jobs, and they're related through these paths. So the dromic aspect is like moving from one path to, or one object to another, and then depending on what part of this path you're in, those things are important at any given time or any given part of the process. Without mapping this to any specific thing, and I'm not going to do that because it's it take me a while to kind of figure out the example. Just think of this as sort of like an alternative to a hierarchy, and then think about these nervous circuits as like the nervous system isn't hierarchical, it's heterarchical, or at least these paths that he's describing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's trying to get at is the same thing that von Forester was getting at, was looking at closed sensory motor loops, or in this case, reflex arcs, which are this old thing that Sherrington discovered, and that are kind of the basis for sensory motor closed loop systems. So if I hit you on the knee, you have this local reflex arc where your leg goes up. If I give you a stimulus in a sensory motor loop, there's a little bit more control there, but basically you give a response, a behavior and response. So the term reflex originally meant a disturbance which initiated by an extranervous organ, returned by a nervous path to that same organ. So it's like if you have you disturb the sort of equilibrium state by tapping your knee, and then there's a response that comes out of that. Or I guess in the sense of reflex, it's like if I give you a stimulus, you respond to that stimulus. That's a reflex. And then the law of Bell-Magendie, that impulses enter the nervous system by dorsal and emerge by ventral roots, which is just the pathways through the nervous system, specified the direction of conduction of these circular disturbances. So again, circular disturbances, the reflex arc, the sensory motor loops. We're just interested in how we perturb that closed system, sort of semi-closed, of sort of reference. So if we think about the sensory motor loop that von Forester talked about, you might have some sensory information coming in, you're acting upon it, and that's sort of a self-contained thing. It can become inconsistent over time, perhaps. You can perturb that by maybe the observer normalizing things, or you can have some external perturbation which maybe disturbs that whole system. And then so he's just thinking about the sort of the abstract level here, which is where you're thinking about this sort of recursive system of feedbacks and self-reference, and then you're thinking about ways to sort of push that around or to perturb it or to correct it in some way. And it's not specific. I mean, it could be specific to anatomy. It could just be like a connectionist system, which has nodes and connections. Circular propagation in this direction was called dromic, and the opposite antidromic. So again, dromic is very important here. With the possible exception of phenomena comparable to that described by Porter, no response of any effector is ever indicated in antidromic reflex, although conduction in the reverse direction has been demonstrated in both the dorsal and ventral roots. So dromic refers to, I guess, specifically to this reflex arc and some of the, so maybe it's a technical term they use in that. So you're propagating something in a certain direction within the loop. And if you're going forward, it's dromic. If you're going backwards, it's antidromic. And, beyond that, I'm not going to get into that. uh, what that actually means in terms of what the outputs of the network are, or the loop. The term reflex has laterally been used of any activity in which one pylon was extraneural, regardless of whether or not it was somatic. Lack of anatomic continuity about the external pylon let aftercomers ignore the essential circularity. All reflexes are dromes, activities of feedback mechanisms, and consequently their function includes all purposive activity. So, I mean, this is really getting deep into kind of jargon and things, but I think the point here is I wanted to make is to say that these circular systems in the von Forester paper, he formalizes things in terms of cybernetic regulation, can map to these sort of nervous nets and what's going on in the brain, and things like reflexes and reflex arcs. And and again, this is our guy without the shirt. And so he's really interested in building what would then become neural networks. So I don't think he knew about neural networks at the time, but basically a lot of his work would go on to that. So McCulloch is really kind of thinking about these kind of system level aspects of the reflex arc. Their temporal importance in determining the formal properties of nervous activity have been previously discussed. This is the McCulloch and Pitts paper in 1943. Concerning endodromes as well as reflexes, it is well to recall that given feedback circuits may be regenerative for one temporal combination of excitations and degenerative for another. So these loops in the brain or in a nervous system or in a simulated or artificial nervous system, they're not persistent necessarily. Sometimes they are regenerated over time and sometimes they degenerate into nothing. So you get these loops that maybe are transient. Sometimes they persist over long periods of time. And so we don't really know why that is. We just know that happens. And so any number of parallel circuits may be utilized by a single drome, and these circuits may divide and unite without the disturbance ceasing to be dromic. So this is kind of the idea of heterarchy. So, hierarchical system would argue that, or if we had a hierarchical system here, we would have a main circuit and then subcomponents of the circuit, or we might have one circuit that coordinates all other circuits underneath. In a heterarchy, of course, we can have these transient loops that kind of exist in different parts of the network and that sort of contribute to the overall output. So there is no one driver, there is no one sort of control system. It's just kind of locally emergent. And this is kind of, again, they don't have the language for this yet, but that's basically what we're doing here. And so we're interested in disturbances, we're interested in these directional movements within these nervous nets and their pathways, and then we're interested in maybe their persistence and how they're contributing to the overall output of behavior. So this is a figure here, figure 1. It shows, again, these are just all line drawings. This shows the central nervous system, an excitatory synapse, a receptor. So we have this loop where we have a synapse and a receptor. We have this continuous line or nervous portion of path. So there's this procession of time and processing over time. We have the afferent peripheral neuron, which is the receptor, the efferent peripheral neuron, which is the effector, and we have this broken line, which is the nervous, somatic, or environmental portion of the path. So if we think about this top part of the diagram, it's basically the inside of the agent, this reflex arc, or this sensory motor processing that happens within the brain or wherever it is inside the agent. You have the receptor here, so information comes into the agent. It gets processed in some central nervous system, and then it gets executed as behavior through an effector. And then this broken line, which is nervous, somatic, or environmental aspects, are the sensory information, or in this case, importantly, the perturbation that happens with this to trigger this reflex arc. So you have this information coming in the receptor, but you also have perturbations that affect the output in linear and nonlinear ways. So I think that's enough for this paper. Yeah, I mean, it's jargon filled and it's maybe unclear to the modern eye, but basically you're building this cybernetic case for intelligent behavior from networks, and this is all very important, I think, to artificial neural networks, to thinking about our modern conception of behavioral feedback, and then how this is regulated, and maybe that's useful to neuroscience, systems neuroscience.
Yeah, it's I'm blanking. Is it Grace Lindsay?
Yeah.
You had the book recently, like covering, covering historic developments like this.
Yeah.
Like, it's like seeing them in their context, for the remarkable achievements they are. It would be it would be interesting. Could an LLM make that paper readable to a modern author?
I don't know.
It could be a translation problem.
Yeah, translation problem. Yeah. Well, it might make it worse. It might make it worse.
Yeah. Or do you end up with the what's the Samuel Mark Twain, where he takes the English story, translates to French, translates it back to English.
Oh yeah.
But you end up with this like completely different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, good deal.
Yeah.
And so someone who definitely understood, the math that he was also, working with at the time. And I didn't realize UIC was kind of like the med school.
Yeah, like in the 60s, they kind of shifted towards a full university.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty.
All right.
Well, next week, I think the RX infer stuff that I was talking about is something that they talk about as the great LLM Bayesian integration experiment. So I will try to say more next week.
Okay, sounds good.
And I don't know if it's necessarily where it makes sense for like open source sustainability, but it would be nice. I think we'll have met. I forget when our next SF CogSci reading group is, but actually one of the one of the papers that I was suggesting for it is actually got has actually got the name, or the computational model is called Gecko.
Oh yeah.
And I tried not to read too much into that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I might talk about. I'm probably going to bring up both, because it's like it might be too computational. It might be too computational psychiatry for the CogSci reading group.
Yeah.
I reading the Tom Griffiths paper, that recent paper. Tom Griffiths has a new book. I don't know if you saw this. That'll be, I think, out in February.
Oh.
And like this is the algorithms we live by guy.
Yeah.
But I like both of these papers. I mean, I like the lazy dynamics and this gecko paper, in terms of just like interesting uses of LLM agents in modeling. Not like in the gecko example, it's actually proposing. It's like you're having an LLM agent propose the generative models for behavioral data sets.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. So it's just like it's like anyway. And so what you're trying to do is actually have, it's kind of like an AI scientist.
Yeah.
But it's an AI scientist doing computational psychiatry.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the data you're modeling is something like reaction times or choices or things like that.
Yeah.
And that actually relates to this lazy dynamics thing, because I think some of their examples, this is just like the non-science world, is that a lot of their examples and the kind of stuff that actually the PyMC team is paid to do is actually all marketing data. It's like the commercial probabilistic programming companies like all work on marketing problems, which I think is actually really funny. Which by the way is kind of Google's whole business.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to advertise.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a big industry.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so next time.
Yeah, next time. All right. Have a good week. Thanks.
You too. Take
See you
care.
later. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.